All right, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Parshas Lecha can be found on page 63 in the Steinsaltz Chumash and page 54 in the Stone Chumash. 63 in the Steinsaltz, 54 in the Stone Chumash. Okay, with beginning Parshas Lecha, we begin the story of Avram Avinu, Avram and Sarah, and the story of the Jewish people. As we know, Avraham just appears on the scene. Vayomer Hashem el Avram Lech Lecha seems to come out of nowhere, as opposed to Adam Harishon, who we know Adam Harishon from the moment he is born, as opposed to Noach, who we know before the flood. We don't know a lot about him, but at least we know that he's a tzaddik. We know that he is tamim. We know Noach's character before Hashem says to Noach, "I'm going to destroy the world. I want you to build an ark." So we understand why Hashem turns to Noach specifically to have him build the ark, because Noach is the most righteous person in his generation. Avraham, however, we know next to nothing about Avraham. And so we don't know why Hashem turns to Avram specifically and says to him, Lech Lecha, and not somebody else. Hindsight's 2020. And so growing up with the story of Avraham, we know exactly why Avraham was chosen, as it were, for Lech Lecha, because he came to know Hashem. He was the one person in his generation who believed in Hashem. But the story that the Torah presents us is that Avram comes out of nowhere. We know very little, next to nothing about Avram when he appears on the scene. What do we know about Avram? Well, we know his lineage, because the Torah pays special attention to give us the lineage from the 10 generations from Adam to Noach, and then the 10 generations from Noach to Avram. So we know Avram's father, Terach, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, 20 generations all the way up to Adam Harishon. So we know Avram's lineage. That the Torah makes clear. But other than that, we don't know much about him. We know his wife's name. We know her name is Sarai. We know they have no children. That's what we're told. But in terms of who the character of Avram is at the time that Hashem turns to him and says, Lech Lecha, that the Torah specifically leaves out. And we all know from the Midrashim that the Midrash seeks to fill in this blank, that whatever the Torah doesn't tell us, we know from Torah Shebaal Peh, we know from the Midrash, we know the stories of how Avraham came to believe in Hashem, rejected the idol worship of his father and the surrounding culture, and in the Midrash, it shows Avraham as this heroic figure of faith in a time when people were obviously suffused with Avodah Zarah. I'd like to make another observation before we dive into the text. The first observation I made, no brilliant observation, it's as old as the text itself, is that we don't know anything about Avram before he sold Lech Lecha. The second observation, though, I want to make is that there's something else that's left out. Not only is the story of who Avram was until now left out, but when Hashem tells him to venture forth, to go to the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, Hashem doesn't tell him which land. Hashem says, El ha'aretz asher ar'eka, go to the land that I will show you. And so there's something else that's left out here. Not only is the early story of Avram left out, but when Hashem turns to him and says, Lech Lecha, the story remains ambiguous. Hashem doesn't tell him where to go. And yet Avram seems to know where to go. And so these two ambiguities, I think, can be explained in the same way, and I think they reflect something fundamental about Avram and Sarai, about the story, about what the Torah is trying to teach us about Avram and Sarai, and that's what we're gonna discuss this morning. So again, why aren't we told anything about Avram beforehand, and why does Hashem give him such a vague summons or commandment, Lech Lecha, when he finally does tell him to do something? So to begin our study, let's take a look at the end of last week's Parsha when we are first introduced to Avram. That puts us on page 61 in the Steinsaltz and page 50 in the Art Scroll. We'll start from verse 26. Vayechi Serach, or Terach. Vayechi Terach Shivim Shana. Terach lives for 70 years. Vayoled es Avram es Nachor ve'es Haran. He gives birth to Nachor, Haran, Avram, Nachor, and Haran, sorry. Ve'ela toldos Terach, right? Remember, this is coming at the conclusion of all the genealogy, and so it's the same formulaic language of the genealogy. Ve'ela toldos Terach, Terach holides Avram es Nachor ve'es Haran, ve'Haran holides Lot. We're told that Haran is the father of Lot. Obviously, we're being told this because Lot is going to play a role in the life of Avram. Vayamos Haran al pnei Terach aviv be'eretz moladto be'ur kasdim. Haran dies young during the life of Terach in his birthplace Ur Kasdim, something that's going to be important in a moment. Vayikach Avram v'Nochor lahem nashim. And Avram and Nochor marry wives. Shem eshes Avram Sarai v'Shem eshes Nochor Milka bas Haran avi Milka v'afi Yiska. V'atihi Sarai hakara. We're told that Sarai is barren. Ein lav alad. Vayikach Terach es Avram beno. Ves Lot ben Haran ben Beno ve'es Sarai kalaso eshes Avram beno vayitzu itam me'ur kasdim laleches arza Canaan. So very fascinating, and we've discussed this in previous years. That not long before, but before Hashem says anything to Avram, Terach is already on his way to Eretz Canaan, which is a startling thing to think about. That the place that Hashem is going to show Avram where to go, Terach, Avram's father, was already going there. Vayitzu itam me'ur kasdim laleches artzagan vayikach Terach. Terach took his family, to leave Ur Kasdim and to travel to Eretz Canaan. Of all places, Eretz Canaan. He leaves Ur Kasdim to go to Eretz Canaan. Vayivo ad Haran, and they get to Haran, vayeshvu sham, and they sit there. They stop. For some reason, Terach doesn't get all the way to the land of Canaan. He doesn't get to the promised land. Instead, he gets to Haran and he stops. Vayeshvu sham. They settle down there. Vayeshvu sham, right? It's not just that they were stopped in a motel. Vayeshvu sham. They settled there, it seems. Vayihiyu yemei serach chameshim v'masayim shana vayamos Terach b'Haran. Terach doesn't just die. Terach dies in Haran. Terach dies in the place that he stopped in when he was originally going to Eretz Canaan. Very strange. Very, very strange. So that when Parshas Lech Lecha opens up and Hashem says to Avram, Lech Lecha me'artzko miladcha me'beis avicha el aretz asher areka, he doesn't tell him where he's going. It's interesting to note that Terach was on his way there already with his family, on his way there to Eretz Canaan already. So to understand why Terach was already on his way, first we have to note a couple of things that are strange in the text, which gives rise to a major machlokas rishonim, and that is as follows: when Avram is told, "Lech lecha, me artzecha, umi moladcho mi beis avicha," so let's understand what that means. It's not just poetry; everything means something very important. Go from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's home. So what's Artzecha? What's Avram's land? Is Avram's land Ur Kasdim, where it seems that he's born? Is it Haran, where he's living now? What about umimolatecha, from your birthplace? What's his birthplace? If his birthplace is Ur Kasdim, the only thing that doesn't really make sense is that Avram is not living in his birthplace right now. If Hashem is speaking to Avraham in Haran, where they are right now at the end of last week's Parsha, right? Terach takes them out of Ur Kasdim. They travel to Haran on the way to Eretz Canaan. They don't make it to Eretz Canaan. Hashem says, leave your birthplace. Avram already left his birthplace. Avram already left Ur Kasdim. Now he's in Haran, where they stopped on the way. So how do we understand that? Umi beis avicha, the house of your father. What's the house of your father? Well, maybe that makes more sense because his father moved and they settled in Haran. So he's telling him to leave Haran, whether it's his birthplace or not. But taken together with everything, it's a little bit strange. So there's a major machlokas rishonim how to address this issue, because you have the Ibn Ezra who says, just like you find in the text, Avram is from Ur Kasdim. Avram is from Ur Kasdim. He's from a place that's called Ur Kasdim. And what does it mean that he has to leave his land and his birthplace and his father's home? Well, there's a couple ways that you can explain this. One way is to say that it means to continue leaving these places. Meaning, yes, you left Ur Kasdim already, but in leaving Ur Kasdim, continue to move away from there, basically. Right? So me'artzecha umimolatecha, yes, your land and your birthplace is Ur Kasdim. Yes, you're not in Ur Kasdim, but you were on your way. Continue on your way, moving away from, leaving that world behind. That's one way of putting it. Interestingly, the Ibn Ezra, in offering his opinion, the Ibn Ezra is arguing on Chazal, who say that Ur Kasdim might not necessarily be identifying a place geographically. Rather, Ur Kasdim is a reference to the furnace that Avram was thrown into by Nimrod. That when Avram comes to reject the world of Avodah Zarah that surrounds him, he's thrown into the furnace by Nimrod, and so Ur Kasdim isn't an actual place. Ur Kasdim represents the furnace. It's based on that approach that the Ramban argues vigorously with Ibn Ezra and holds that Avraham is not from Ur Kasdim. Avraham is from Haran. Avram is from Haran, and the Ramban cites a number of textual indications that Avram is truly from Haran. So first of all, the fact that he's told Umi Molatecha, from your birthplace, when he's living in Haran. Furthermore, later in Chumash it says Va'ekach es Avraham me'ever hanahar. Right, I took Avram from the other side of the river. Ever hanar, the other side of the river, seems more closely to match Haran than Ur Kasdim. Also, when Avraham dispatches his servant to find a wife for Yitzchak, he tells him, "Ki el artzi umoladti telech." You should go to my land, my birthplace. And where does he go? He goes to Haran, right? That's where Rivka is. So that's another indication that Avram is truly from Haran. Plus, furthermore, when it says Vayikach Terach in the end of last week's Parsha, right, that Terach takes Avraham and Lot and his whole family, that he takes them from Ur Kasdim. So that doesn't make sense. If Avraham is leaving Ur Kasdim because Hashem summoned him to leave Ur Kasdim when he told him Lech Lecha, right? And so the Ramban is assuming that that event of last week's Parsha is part of the Lech Lecha summons, if that's the case, then it wouldn't make sense to say Vayikach Terach, because it was really Avram following the calling of Hashem to leave Ur Kasdim. So that all of that indicates that Haran is truly the birthplace of Avraham, and the way that the Ramban constructs the story, knowing these midrashim which describe Avraham's heroic acts. Basically, what the Ramban constructs is that Avram is born in Haran. They move to Ur Kasdim. Ur Kasdim is where he's thrown into the furnace. Ur Kasdim is the place where Avraham begins to separate himself from the surrounding culture, and he's forced to leave Ur Kasdim and come back to Haran. So it goes Haran, Ur Kasdim, Haran, and then Lech Lecha to the land of Canaan. There are other things in the text that have to be reconciled with this. For instance, later on in this week's Parsha, in chapter 15, in Perek Tezvav, we're not going to turn there, but Hashem says to Avram, Ani Hashem asher hotzeisecha me'ur kasdim. I am Hashem who took you out of Ur Kasdim. Right? How do you understand that if you believe that Avram was originally from Haran? So the Ramban says, very interesting, that it's not that it's so Asher Hotzeisecha clearly indicates that Ur Kasdim is not his birthplace, right? Hotzeisecha indicates if Hashem saved him from Ur Kasdim, then it's a place where he was exiled to, and then Hashem redeemed him from that exile, right? Just like Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeisecha me'eretz Mitzrayim, I took you out of Mitzrayim, meaning the Jewish people are not from Mitzrayim. They were exiled to Mitzrayim and then redeemed from Mitzrayim. Same thing with Avram. Avram's not from Ur Kasdim. He was exiled in Ur Kasdim, as it were, and Hashem took him out of Ur Kasdim. Hashem saved him, right? Hashem saved him from the furnace and brought him back to his birthplace, to Haran. But no matter which approach you take, whether it's the Ibn Ezra's approach that Avram is from Ur Kasdim, or the Ramban's approach that Avram is from Haran, the way that the text is presented to us, I believe, is to show us something very important about the character of Avraham. And I believe that everything that's here can be understood from the perspective that it's trying to highlight Avraham's volition. It's trying to highlight that whatever Avram is doing, he's doing out of his own sense of self-motivation. And what I mean by that is it's the most important feature, I believe, of Avraham's character is the fact that he came to believe in God on his own. Despite the surrounding culture, despite a world dominated by Avodah Zarah, he was able to come and recognize Hashem on his own. And everything you find here, I believe, is coming to highlight or to emphasize the fact that Avrahams' journey to Hashem was a journey that he heroically undertook with a certain sense of independence, as opposed to being commanded by God. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. But when we look at the fact that the family was already headed in the direction of Canaan when Terach dies, I think, and I've said this in previous years, I think that's coming to indicate very clearly that Avram came from a family that intuited something, that sensed something about the need to be in the land of Canaan. It can't be a coincidence that Terach was traveling to the very land that Hashem intended to give his descendants. Clearly, Terach sensed something. Terach is not a hero of monotheism like Avram is, but clearly he sensed something. And so he picks up his family, Vaikach Terach, right? Terach picks up his family and starts heading towards the land of Canaan. But Terach did not understand as much as Avram did. Terach did not perceive Hashem as much as Avram did, which is why he stops in Haran. By way of analogy, Terach's spiritual cell phone did not have as much reception as Avraham's, right? Avram had all four of his bars in his spiritual reception on his cell phone. Terach had like one. And so Terach could kind of make out this idea of traveling towards Canaan. But Avraham heard the voice of Hashem very clearly. It was Avraham who was able to hear the voice of Hashem summoning him, Lecha, summoning him to the land of Canaan. And so when Avram hears the voice of Hashem, and it says Lech Lecha, I think it's very important to note what many of the commentaries note, that Lech Lecha is kind of a strange formulation, right? Hashem could have just said to Avram, Lech, go, right? Go. I want you to go to the land of Canaan. Lech, like Hashem says to Yonah, Lech el Ninveh, right? Go to Ninveh and call on Ninveh and tell them to do tshuva, right? Hashem could have just said, go to the land of Canaan. But it says, Lech Lecha, go for you, which is obviously it's hard to translate into English. Rabbi Steinsaltz says, go you from your land. Lech Lecha me'artzecha, go you. That doesn't really capture it. Lecha means to you. And the Meforshim grapple with this, right? Rashi says, what does Lecha mean? It must mean Lahanascha, Latovascha, for your benefit and for your good, right? Because Lecha seems to indicate something about Avram. But to me, recognizing that what the Torah is, again, the Torah here wants to emphasize how Avram came to Hashem on his own. So I think Lech Lecha is trying to de-emphasize the notion of commandment and instead recognize that Hashem is saying to Avraham, continue to go on the journey that you put yourself on. Lech Lecha, right? Go for you, meaning for the sake of what you're doing, meaning your recognition of Hashem, your belief in Hashem that came to you on your own. Part of that journey is I'm now going to start directing that journey. Your personal volition, Avraham, your free will, your willingness to recognize and perceive Hashem in this world, I'm now going to direct that. And so Hashem doesn't come at Avraham with a full-fledged commandment, Lech, go. Instead, no, it's softer than a full commandment. It's Lech Lecha, continue to go on your journey. Continue to do the things that you yourself came up with all on your own. And that means a break from your land, from your birthplace, from your father, right? El Haaretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you. And so the idea that Hashem does not tell Avraham where he's going, I think fits beautifully in this. Because that's too much of an ironclad commandment, right? If Hashem says, okay, I want you to go to point B, so Avram's following the commandment to go to point B. But that's not what the Torah wants to teach us about Avram right now. Avram will become the person who follows commandments. But right now, the Torah wants to introduce us to an Avraham who comes to Hashem on his own. And so that's why it's an ambiguous commandment. That's why it's El Haaretz Asher Areka. Avram, you're already going on your own journey. You've already chosen to believe in Hashem and to follow a certain calling. Together with your father, you left Ur Kasdim and you went to Haran. Continue on that journey, but do it in your way. Do it in a way that reflects the sense of personal volition that you have, Avraham. And so that's why Avraham, instead of arriving in Canaan, because that's where Hashem told him exactly to go, instead, Avraham arrives in Canaan because he knows on his own that that's where he should be going. Because the Avraham that the Torah wants us to get to know is the Avram who comes to his belief in Hashem on his own through his own will. And I would say even further. When Avram arrives in Canaan, right? So I'm on page 65 in the Steinsaltz, page 56 in the Art Scroll. So Pasuk Daled, Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem. So Avram continues to go like Hashem spoke to him. Doesn't say kasher tziva. Doesn't say like he commanded him. It says like he spoke to him. Vayelech ito Lot, and Lot went with him. Avram chamishim rishim shol b'tzei so mecharan. Vayikach Avram es Sarai ishto v'es Lot ben achiv es kol rechusham. Right, he takes everything. Vayitzu lechas artza Canaan vayavo artza Canaan, and he goes to Canaan because he knows Hashem didn't say go to Canaan, but he goes to Canaan. Vayavor Avram ba'aretz. So what does Avram do now that he's in Canaan? Again, Avraham is driving himself. Vayavor Avram ba'aretz ad makom Shechem ad elon moreh. Back in the Yazvars, he knows where to go. Or it's not that he knows where to go, it's that he chooses where to go. Avram chooses where to go in the land of Canaan. Again, this is not Avram who follows commandments. That Avram will meet later, especially at the Akedah. Right now, we're getting to know an Avraham who moves towards Hashem and moves with Hashem because he found him all on his own. Vayira Hashem el Avram, and so Avram arrives in the land of Canaan, and Hashem appears to him. Vayomer lazaracha tenes arsazos vayiven sham mizbeach Hashem hanirei love, and Avram all on his own, without any commandment, builds a mizbeach to Hashem. Vayitech misham ha'ara mikedel beisel v'yeto alo, and then he moves. Hashem didn't tell him where to go, but he moves. Beisel miyam v'aymikedem vayiven sham mizbeach Hashem vayikra b'shem Hashem vayisa Avram haloch v'naso hanegba, and then Avram travels southward. Again, there are no commandments here. Hashem is not telling Avram where to go. But Avram intuits, Avram senses out of his own sense of volition where he should be going. And then look what happens next. In Pasuk Yud, Vayira of Ba'aretz, there's a famine. Hashem told Avram to go to the land of Canaan. There's a famine. Avram leaves. Hashem just told him to go to the land of Canaan, and Avram leaves, doesn't get blamed for it. That's okay. What happened? Right? We know this is one of the tests, right? Chazal tell us this is one of the tests, that Avram was told the land of Canaan would be his, and the next moment he has to exile himself from that land. So that's a test of Avram's faith. But seen in the light of what we're saying now, it's fascinating how Avraham is still driving his own destiny. He goes down to Egypt. He knows on his own to hide the identity of Sarai. That's which is her name at this point, right? And how does Hashem deal with all of that? Hashem's going along with it. Avram's in the driver's seat. Avram decides that this is what he should do to protect Sarai, and Hashem follows along. Hashem afflicts the house of Paro because they took Sarai. They took Sarai because Avram said he was his sister, and they took her because of what Avram did. Avram didn't turn around and go back and try to eke out a living in the famine-stricken land of Canaan. No, he put himself in danger in the land of Mitzrayim, all on his own, and Hashem plays along. Because this is the Avram that the Torah wants us to know. This is the Avram that the Torah wants us to understand. And so when we go back to our first observation, that the Torah doesn't give us the early story of Avram, I think it's to further highlight the fact that Avram is the one who comes to the belief in Hashem, all on his own. And the details that the Torah chooses to offer us are the details that really drive that home. Look at Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Aleph. I'm on page 67 in the Steinsaltz, page 58 in the Art Scroll. Vayitzav, not Vayitzav, Vayal Avram miMitzrayim hu v'ishto v'chol asher lo velot imo hanegba. Right, so Avram comes back from Mitzrayim again, all on his own. Right, Hashem doesn't tell Avram to come back, and Avram has many possessions. He's very well to do, and he comes back. Vayelech l'masa'av, pasuk Gimel. Vayelech l'masa'av. Avraham goes on his journeys to the place where his tent had been beforehand. Ad makom asher yasham alo. Right? So these aren't the masa'os of Hashem. These aren't the masa'os. These aren't the places, right, where he chose to travel coming back. L'masa of Avraham. Abraham's travels. And then we get to the story of how they Avram and Lot are still, both have many possessions, and there were fights between their shepherds. And so Avram says to Lot, all right, let's choose different places. Again, this just further adds to the character, to the notion that Avram is in control of is the one driving his destiny. He's the one who chooses to separate from Lot. He's the one who chooses to say, okay, you take whatever you want. I'll sit over here. That further, it's just a further indication of who Avram is. And then in a very fascinating, kind of deja vu sort of concept, Hashem says to Avraham in this chapter 13, after he separates from Lot, and says, "You're going to be a great nation. You're going to become so great you won't be able to count your descendants." And then look at Pasuk Yud Zayin, page 71 in the Steinsaltz, and page 60 in the Art Scroll. In Pasuk Yud Zayin, it says, "Kum hitalech ba'aretz le'arka l'rachba ki lecha etnena." So again, here's another Lech commandment, a quote unquote commandment or summons that Hashem gives to Avram, and again, it's non-specific, right? Kum hitalech, go for a walk, right? Make yourself to walk in the land, l'arka u'l'rachba, to its length and to its breadth. Okay, because I'm giving it to you, right? Chazal see this idea of walking the length and the breadth. That's just a way of taking possession, right? There's a concept in halacha of one way of taking possession is to go around the borders and fix up the borders of a land. That's one way to demonstrate ownership. Here, Avram is being told to demonstrate ownership. The fact that Chazal make this observation is because it's not clear what Lar Kol Rachba means or why he's doing it. To me, it's a further indication that Avram comes to know God on his own. Hashem wants to direct that recognition, that knowledge of Hashem in the right way. And so he tells him generally where to go. But who chooses where to go? Look at the next pasuk. Vayehal Avram vayavo vayeshev be'elonim amrei asher bechevron vayiven sham mizbeach laHashem. Avram chooses where to go. He chooses where to pitch his tent. He sits in elonim amrei and he builds another mizbeach. Because who Avram is and his service of Hashem, the emphasis right now in the story of Avram is that this is all this is all Avram's volition. This is Avram coming to know Hashem, and I think that's important because Hashem chooses Avram and Sarai and their descendants to establish a covenant with. Hashem will give them many commandments, many mitzvos to Avram and to their descendants. And it's only someone who knows how to submit to the will of Hashem on their own who will be able to then take all of the commandments that Hashem will give them, over time. And that's why I believe Hashem has to test Avraham, right? Hashem tests Avraham 10 times according to Chazal. The reason why Hashem tests Avraham is because Avraham came to his belief on his own. Perhaps it would have been a different kind of story if Hashem appeared to Avraham, performed great miracles, and Avraham was forced to believe in Hashem. Avraham had no other choice. But that's not the picture that the Torah is painting for us of Avraham's belief. It's not a belief that where Avraham had no choice but to believe, right? Hashem did not split the sea for Avraham. Hashem did not do 10 plagues in front of Avraham. Instead, Avraham comes to believe in Hashem on his own. And because Avraham comes to believe in Hashem on his own, he has to be tested. That faith has to be tested because it's faith that came on its own. Because it came on its own, it has to be tested, validated, and ingrained within Avraham. And the only way to take that self-made faith and make it concrete and real is to test it. And that's how to understand all the tests that he's been given. And so when I think about that famous formulation of when the Jewish people accepted the Torah of Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. So that notion of we will do first is understood by many as a recognition that the Jewish people are willing to accept upon themselves Hashem's commandments and then to understand them. And I think this notion of Naaseh, that trajectory from we willingly take upon ourselves the covenant, and then we will listen, right? And then we will hear all the commandments. But we willingly commit ourselves. That's the same path that I think Avraham is following, right? That Avraham, as it were, lives a life of Naaseh, right? He willingly accepts upon himself the belief in Hashem and Hashem's direction, and then v'nishma, and then he will be the one to hear, to listen, to understand, to accept the commandments, to follow the commandments that Hashem is giving him. So that's what I think. When we started by making those two observations of we're not told, we're not given the early story of Avraham, number one. And when Avram is finally given a commandment, quote unquote, of Lecha, it's unspecific. All of that comes to shine a light on how we see that Avraham is one who acts out of a sense of personal volition. He, together with his family, left Ur Kasdim, traveled to Haran, knew where they were going. Avram understood it better. And it's because of that Hashem says, Lech Lecha, go for you, to you, because you already are on a journey, you're on a path that you have developed on your own. And I want you to continue on that. I want you to continue to develop and to grow that belief in Hashem because you're the only one in this generation who's doing so. And it's out of that faith that Hashem will then make a commitment, will then make a bris, and that bris will come with responsibilities, with mitzvos. It'll be the product of tests, all built on the fact that this is who Avram is. Okay, all right, we'll stop here. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning. Have a great Shabbos at the end of the week, and I'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.